Guys, it's finally happened! Pharah lore content, it's real! And I know it's been a couple months since the comic came out, but I just had to collect my thoughts to be able to put out this video. So what I want to do here is deep dive into this comic and break it down scene by scene and talk about what I know about Pharah, as she is my favorite character, and just share what I know. And I'm just gonna be rambling about Pharah. It took 5 years for Pharah to be featured in the lore again. Her debut comic was 8 pages long. Each issue of New Blood is 23 pages long. She originally was supposed to have a cinematic, but that got scrapped.
Pharah comic that we did for the launch of... yeah, we have some of the images from that. When we started working on Pharah, it was originally going to be a cinematic. It was going to be one of the first animated pieces for the launch of Overwatch.
And Pharah had not been featured in the lore since May 2016. 5 years, 5 months, 21 days. But you know what? It happened! It finally happened, and I'm so happy. Because Pharah is really a great, amazing character, and I love her for so many reasons. So if you read the comic and you're not too crazy about it, you know, maybe I can change your mind, break it down, and talk about what I love about this comic and Pharah's character and everything like that, alright? Alright, getting into it. I want to go over her introduction in New Blood issue number 1. So a cool thing I want to point out in issue number 1 that carries over to issue number 2 is that in this comic, Pharah is specifically shown during the daytime, while Ana is shown during the nighttime. What's significant about this is both of them have the Wadjet tattoo, but depending which eye it's on, it actually changes meanings. So the side Ana has it on symbolizes things like healing powers and nighttime, actually. Whereas the side it's on for Pharah, one of the things it represents is daytime. So I thought that was a really cool detail to see that element of their design reflected when they're shown separate from each other. And then later in the comic, when they meet face to face, it's actually only at sunset. The build up to Cole meeting with Pharah here's cliffhanger of issue 1, ending on the long-awaited introduction of Pharah into the main story. It's prefaced with foreshadowing of the identifiable shapes of the Helix soldiers soaring overhead, showing how powerful their jets are, with Cole clutching onto his hat as they soar above him, leading the viewer to the familiar blue version being seen in the distance, before bringing us closer to finally see her appear. For me, this was an incredibly emotional moment. You did it! Despite this being the first time Pharah's shown up in the main story, whereas her own debut comic was more self-contained, she's actually referenced a few times in like the external promotional material as a familiar face. So what's cool is the comic is aware that we, the audience, know Pharah. We know her relationship with the other characters, and no time is wasted on establishment or flashbacks. It's a story within the Overwatch universe that actually uses our familiarity with the heroes as a jumping off point. So it moves the plot forwards, like, for the first time in Overwatch history, at least on this level. Relationships between heroes are confronted and changed and evolved, which is what so many of us have stuck around this long as fans of the characters really been wanting to see. Character relationships being addressed and evolving. So the comic recognizes this and shows us the story from there. They know we know Pharah. They know we know that Pharah knew Cole from her past. This story leverages us knowing Pharah's relationship with her mom and all of those important points. Doesn't bother with any exposition of like Pharah being kept out of Overwatch. It knows we know as the viewers, so that alone is huge for this comic, even if you don't care about Pharah or Ana or their relationship, although their relationship is pretty core to like fundamental Overwatch character relationships. It's like the biggest one. Pharah being what the comic ended on as the big reveal is pretty cool. So starting with page 1, there's already a lot to get into. So keep in mind that this takes place 2 days after Ana and Cole met with each other. We see the Talon attack that had ambushed them starting in the marketplace has led to a fire in the warehouses behind Pharah. while she adorns her Raptora Mark 6 suit on duty. Freya is the captain of her squad at Helix, as that was the title she acquired from her debut comic back in 2016. Although before this, she was previously also a captain in the Egyptian Armed Forces. Her bio on the Overwatch website reiterates how she was a talented leader in the army and earned the respect of all she commanded. She has a lot of leadership themes going on. And it was her accolades from being in the army, which is why she was specifically recruited to pilot the Raptora Mark 6 suit. So we see here in her internal dialogue, she says, "This is a dangerous time. We are Cairo's first line of defense, and that line is challenged every day." This adds up with pretty much all of the Overwatch lore prior, talking about how Egypt is frequently referred to as being in a state of turmoil at the present moment. And the cause is from Overwatch's intervention in the affairs of the country at some point after the Omnic Crisis.
If you look at the short story Valkyrie, Mercy here says, "But everywhere I went, I felt the echoes of Overwatch, and my own guilt over the problems we had left behind when it had fallen apart, which is what led me to Egypt. Overwatch was responsible for much of the country's suffering, and I needed to help repair it. But I had not received a warm welcome. Go home, they'd tell me. You've done enough damage." And then in Bastet, there's this excerpt that says, "Ana navigated the narrow alleys, finding the routes through the labyrinthian tangle of streets and pathways, keeping an eye out for the patrols that circled like hawks. For once in her life, she was grateful for the city's patchwork infrastructure, still recovering a decade after Overwatch's intervention. The state of Ana's home country was one of the reasons she had been drawn back to it. She felt responsible for Overwatch's legacy here, whether it had been her choice or not." And then another excerpt from Bastet. "Ana considered her options. In her heart, she knew she wanted to stay. Egypt was falling. In a few more years, it was likely that it would fall into chaos, torn apart by profiteers and criminals like Hakim. The bounty hunter's strike, she had been slowly making a difference. Little by little, if she left, all her work would be undone."
And we don't know exactly what happened, but I should probably mention now that this November we are getting an Overwatch Declassified Files lore book, so I hope we find some answers there. But Egypt had been thrown into chaos due to Overwatch. It makes me speculate about Freya's feelings towards Overwatch as a whole. In Valkyrie, while from Angela's perspective, it seems that the country overall has a negative feelings towards the organization, though there are some exceptions to this I'll talk about later. But I wish we knew more about Freya's internal dilemma regarding this. Unfortunately, it doesn't get explored in this comic, but it's something to consider. There are a lot of things that were left unexplored in this comic that I think later on might get addressed in Overwatch 2. But Freya considered Overwatch a family as she was raised within the organization itself, and she traveled along with the organization with her mom, despite never joining it.
Pharah was brought up in Overwatch in sort of an international community.
It may add to the weight on her shoulders that she must right the wrongs there, much how Ana and Angela feel about needing to involve themselves in Egypt to fix their mistakes. Freya continues to say, "Just days ago, there was a running Talon attack in a marketplace, bigger than anything we'd seen before." So this line really threw me for a loop, because it made me pause when I read it. This is a direct contradiction, but I think I've figured it out. I've reread Valkyrie, I've reread most of the Overwatch lore that could be in any way relevant to this comic. So, in the events of Valkyrie, there were multiple Talon dropships fighting multiple Helix soldiers, and multiple buildings were completely destroyed. Like, the fight that was described in Valkyrie does pale in comparison to the fight we see Cole and Ana go through in the marketplace. And you know she's specifically talking about the marketplace fight 2 days ago, because she says specifically the marketplace. I thought maybe that fight had led into a bigger fight, which resulted in the building being on fire behind her. But basically, there's no way the collateral damage could have been the size of Valkyrie. And we know Helix was involved in the fight that happened in Valkyrie. So I think I figured this out, and this is just a theory, you know, maybe this is just a throwaway line and it doesn't matter, but something to consider is that it would be possible for Freya to say this if Freya was never present within the events of Valkyrie itself. And the more I think about it, the more likely I believe that to be, because she was not even name dropped, and there's no reference to it at all in this story. And the question is, you know, where would Pharah have been I think if Pharah was visiting her dad in Canada at the time, then she would not have been present for the events of Valkyrie if Valkyrie took place during the winter. We see Furia in the Reflections comic make a brief appearance with her dad in Canada, where we also see Angela and Ana in Egypt in the same comic. So I'm thinking Pharah was not present in Egypt during Valkyrie, but, then again, Reaper was shown somewhere spying on his family in that comic, and he was also in Egypt in Valkyrie. So, you know what, maybe this is just a line to make it sound more dramatic. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. I might add, as anyone who has tried to piece together Overwatch lore may know, it's a little tricky sometimes because going from lore drop to lore drop, we really don't know what has and hasn't been retconned. And sometimes there's some contradictory stuff. There is a very glaring lore contradiction later on that literally cannot be explained with a retcon and only can be explained as a blunder, but I'll get to that later on. So, continuing with Furia's dialogue, she says, they were chasing some unlucky target. Furia later assumes this target to be Cole. What's interesting to speculate, though, is knowing that Talon has information on potential Overwatch recruits, so the Talon attack later on, it could have just been trying to attack her while she was vulnerable. Okay, what Furia says next. My Helix squad tracked the Talon agents to these warehouses, but even this success will do little to dent in their operation. Okay, so there's two things to note here. First, I want to address the obvious. Furia is frustrated with her squad's capability to apprehend the Talon agents, a point she brings up later in the comic. Even their success here will bear little fruit. But the second thing I want to address here is the possibility that this large fire was not started by Talon. The way she words this, it makes it sound like Furia's squad had tracked the Talon agents to the warehouse, right? And then lit the place on fire, which resulted in the success that Furia is referring to. Again, she says, my Helix squad tracked the Talon agents to these warehouses. The warehouses are on fire. She says, but even this success will do little to dent in their operation. Because I can tell you, it took me a little while to figure out why this warehouse would have been on fire in this case. As Furia says, the Talon attack happened like 2 days ago, at least the big part of it. We know she has the firepower. After all, Furia is on the kill everything team in Helix. And we know how destructive Helix can be. So it's very possible this wasn't just a random Talon pyromaniac burning down their base of operations, which could have been possible if they wanted to get rid of some evidence. But like I said, the fact that Helix tracked down the troops to the warehouses, Furia stands in front of the burning building as she's describing whatever happened as a success. I do believe the building was probably lit on fire by her orders to kill the Talon agents. And she is the captain of her squad. It would have been on her orders. I'd like to discuss paneling layout. It's a stark contrast from when we see Cole seeing the fire from a distance, and then we see Furia in the thick of it. It really makes you feel like the intensity of the situation when her opening line is like, we are Cairo's first line of defense. To see her in the mass of fires and smoke, which her giving out orders in front of them, showing that she's like the captain and she is on the front lines. Furia like right in the center of the action, emphasizing the importance of her role, especially her role in being Helix's first line of defense. Okay, page 2, we made it. This page starts out with a top-down view where Furia tells her teammate to secure the perimeter and then bring in the medics to tend to the wounded. We don't know if this is referring to wounded Helix members or civilians. What's interesting is that a large theme in Furia's debut comic was being more careful with tending to the needs of her crew. In it, she denies the request to give life-saving medical aid to her teammate because it could potentially compromise her mission. Something she learns from by the end as she picks up the mantle of being a protector, deciding to look out for her squad. The debut comic, I feel, is reflected very well in this comic, actually. As this comic, like towards the end of it, there is also that same theme of Pharah learning the lesson that her mom had already known. Farah's very smart. She is upset with her mom. She knows her mom messed up, but she knows what her mom was good at was being a hero. and she recognizes that and is willing to learn from that. And even though her mom was not in her debut comic, she had to teach herself the knowledge that her mom had already had. This could be a reference to her debut comic and her character progression since then, if she's not referring to civilians but the squad. If she's referring to civilians, it's very possible the medics they would have been escorting in would be those that were working with Angela, as Helix officers have their own medics for their own soldiers. But this could also be another hint towards Pharah and Angela having interacted in Cairo. Angela was located in Cairo for 2 years. Both of them would have been involved in the same events and occurrences of Talon attacks. The squad mate Pharah is talking to could be a new face, it could be Saleh, it could be Tarek. Saleh and Tarek are from her first comic. They don't expand upon it, which is interesting that it isn't even brought up, considering the reason that they gave at BlizzCon for the cancellation of the Pharah cinematic was that they wanted to spend more time personalizing her crewmates, highlighting their importance and their personality.
As we started going through the story and trying to figure out what we wanted to tell, we finally decided that we'd have a lot more fun and a lot more space to explore Pharah, the other members of her squad, if we did that as a comic.
Which is kind of an odd reason, given the comic was only 8 pages long. Then again, other sources say the cinematic was canceled for monetary reasons. This comic is not about her squad mates, but that's just an interesting thing, I guess, to note. No matter who it is, the response is yes, Captain, which, reminds us as the reader, she is the captain of her squad. As she's being saluted, you can see in the background that the crowd recognizes her. They say, "Hey, isn't that Ana Amari's daughter? A hero, just like her mother was." This is another important thing in terms of world building in Overwatch. Of course, they're establishing to us, the reader, this is Ana's daughter. Pharah, so many of her interactions, and even in her debut comic, she is referred to as Ana's daughter. This shows that the crowd recognizes both Ana and Pharah as heroes. Pharah always wanted to be a hero like her mother was. As Cole says later, Pharah achieved her dream of being a hero. But as I mentioned a little bit before with Valkyrie, this actually goes against Angela's perspective of how Overwatch members are seen in Egypt. This is mirrored in London Calling. People of London get excited to see Tracer. They're like, "Oh my god, it's Tracer." And one of them says, "She was one of the good ones." Tracer, being from England, is seen as one of the good ones by the people of England. I think that's mirrored here with Ana being from Egypt, is seen as a hero within Egypt. And Angela faced a lot of backlash because she was not seen as one of the good ones. She was an outsider that interfered negatively with their country, versus Ana, who was protecting her country before even Overwatch was founded. Also, I think it's cute that Pharah might have in-universe fans. Honestly, I think having fans is something Pharah would be very touched by, especially always wanting to be a hero and almost something more for people to look up to, but also for herself to look up to herself in the same way, if that makes sense. So I think at this point, Pharah is very used to being compared to her mother. It's something that's brought up often to her. I don't think this phases her at all anymore, good or bad, but I can imagine that she could have conflicting feelings. I think before Ana's death, it probably was a sense of pride. I think after her mother's death, probably was something she had to get used to in a different way. Pharah knows her mom messed up really bad, and she doesn't want to emulate that. It's almost as if her relationship with her mom is kind of a metaphor as the entire dynamic between the new Overwatch versus the old Overwatch, and that the new Overwatch must reconcile with the death of the former Overwatch and what had went wrong with the former Overwatch to be able to rise up and take its place. Big theme of that, reconciling with the flaws of the original Overwatch, and I feel like Ana and Pharah's relationship is just so key and fundamental to the core of the story of Overwatch being shut down and being reborn, moving on to the next generation. I wish we could see more of how she feels about it. And here, Freya is shown to be surprised, but I don't believe this is because she hears what the crowd is saying. I think it's because, as she says, her training kicks in and she notices a suspicious person in the crowd, that person being Cole. Which it's cool to see her training. Freya has the most credentials and is so qualified to be part of Overwatch. The only reason she wasn't in it originally is because she was blacklisted by her mother. And it's just a little moment in this comic, but I can appreciate that they put on display her extensive military training. She's been training to be in Overwatch her entire life. So it's just nice to see that reiterated. Also, like, when you think about it, like, she was beyond qualified to join Overwatch. Overwatch was a global organization of, like, the world's best heroes, that she was overqualified to join the best organization. Yeah, she must be very good at her job. I do want to note, it's likely Freya was sweating under the helmet due to her proximity to the large fire. I do think it's funny that Cole just moseyed on over into a clearly restricted area. Like, he just pushed his way through the crowds and stepped over that fence where there's, like, debris and, like, the Raptora suits, like, shooting overhead, blowing a bunch of wind everywhere. At this point in the comic, the events of the first issue replay, this time from Freya's perspective. She sees Cole grinning at her and notes how it's typical of him. Now, Cole and Freya have a pretty established history. They have multiple interactions that reference this, although they have been taken out of the game at this point. It is planned at some point to put them back in with Cole's appropriate name, but that at this moment in time, that hasn't happened yet.
Just remember, Pharah, we ain't playing with toy guns anymore.
Good. I'm much better with the real thing. Got you this time, Jesse.
What's your Halloween costume gonna be this year, Pharah?
Cold. McCree, where did you learn to shoot like that? Was it Jack? Gabriel?
Always was a good shot, but well, I got a few pointers from the best. That be your mother?
They have kind of a sort of brother-sister relationship going on, or like a cousin relationship going on. Cole was very much like involved in Freya's life when she was growing up. Again, what's great about this comic is that it doesn't waste any time establishing that or reiterating to us. But, like, despite their close friendship, I think it's obvious that Cole is much closer with Ana than he is with Freya. Cole learned how to shoot from Ana. You can see how well they get along in the previous comic, and I think Cole also sees Ana as, like, a mother figure. So even though Cole and Freya are close to a certain extent, I think it was interesting that Cole is very clearly more close with Freya's mother. I wonder if, like, Cole and Anna's relationship ever caused, like, complicated feelings with Freya, seeing how Ana had distanced herself from Freya, despite Freya, like, loving her mother so much and wanting to by her side and everything. It's been hard to watch Cole live the life that she wanted, fighting side by side with her mother, and Ana having that relationship with Cole that was motherly, while not keeping Cole at arm's length and not keeping Cole out of Overwatch. Freya isn't the jealous type. She's not insecure. But I think it probably did make her sad. Cole standing outside the panel boxes, as seen from Freya's perspective, is probably to exaggerate Cole's dissonance from the rest of Freya's situation and overall disconnect. There is this disconnect between Pharah and the members within the Overwatch organization itself. Pharah is a child of Overwatch. She was raised in the organization. She grew up in it, wanting to be a part of it. And the entire time, there was a disconnect. She was never part of Overwatch. She wasn't fighting their same battles. She was never allowed to join. Especially between Freya and Cole, they should have more in common than Cole does with Ana. They're closer in age, they grew up together, and I think it's probably like intentional paneling decision to have Cole not within the panels.
Okay, that's where I'm gonna call it for now, for part 1. Actually, I'll get out part 2 when I can, but I hope you appreciated my thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed listening. Sorry about any audio issues. I'm very new to this, so hopefully I'll learn more along the way. But yeah, thank you for hearing me out. Thanks for listening. And hopefully I'll see you guys in part 2. So, bye-bye.